Kenya, a beautiful country located in East Africa, has many indigenous animals and scenic areas to be observed. But what many people wouldn't understand is the harsh climate control issues that they are having. We as Climate have been in Kenya to provide insight to those who don't understand the struggles of this developing country. Throughout this episode, we will take you through the vulnerabilities and opportunities of this country, the history of fossil fuel and deforestation, the country's lifestyles and vulnerable populations, how their country is involved in the UNFCCC in Kyoto to help with climate control, and our recommendations for Kenya to improve climate control through the world and through themselves. Let's start with vulnerabilities and opportunities this country has.
Kenya has many advantages as well as disadvantages when it comes to vulnerabilities and opportunities of its economy. Deforestation not only consists of cutting down trees, but cutting water towers as well. This poses as an ecological issue. With this, extra CO2 is being released into the atmosphere. Deforestation affects the land needed for farming, and it also affects the land needed for households. Now, as for disease, it is known that malaria has been a huge problem for Kenya, especially in the humid coastal areas. Droughts in Kenya lead to the lack of drinking water for populations, nor does it help when there is a decrease in rainfall but increase in evaporation. Because of this, there is a dramatic drop in the production of crops. This affects the pastoral and marginal agricultural livelihood zones due to the low amount of soil. Droughts lead to food shortages, which lead to hunger. Because of this, children tend to die at a younger age because of malnutrition. Flooding is another vulnerability in Kenya that is known for causing destruction to homes and traffic accidents. Exposures such as strong El Niños and dealing with rain periods as long as 24 hours a day can leave nothing but devastation throughout the community. Loss of livestock, inaccessible roads, and unfortunately, death and displacements of people are consequences of floodings. As far as opportunities go in Kenya, activities such as planting more will simply help absorb CO2, which will bring in more jobs to the community, thus contributing to agriculture as well. Industrialization is a creator of even more job opportunities. A major change would be a decrease in hunger struggles among the people, and things such as trade would allow Kenya to promote urbanization. Livestock is a big factor in Kenya as well. This is why there should be an increase in the ratio of land using. By this, poor land will be changed to useful land. More potential for the survival of livestock is increasing of droughts. Livestock reduces pressure that is put upon agriculture itself. The best way for livestock to benefit would be to use land that is being improperly used. Renewable energy is a great solution in Kenya, with funding of new research to help lower the ecological issue of pollution. Investing in renewable energy will leave Kenya with more money to develop as a country. Reforestation in Kenya reduces the amount of deforestation effects. Overall, renewable energy will be the most beneficial for Kenya's opportunities because of the money that will be saved in the long run, and more importantly, the country will be able to lower its carbon footprint.
Kenya's economy is affected by global imperialism and industrial revolution. For the global imperialism, the British Empire established the East Africa Protectorate in 1895 from 1920s, known as the Kenya Colony. Kenya was pretty poor before the colonization, and during the British imperialism, its economy strongly relied on British. But after the colonization, the British brought some new crops like tea, coffee, and wheat, and some new species of cattle, sheep. More remarkable, coffee and tea have become the essential cash crop for Kenya, and now most income of Kenya comes from the exporting of these industrial crops. So we can see that the global imperialism brought benefits to Kenya's economy. But the colonization hurts black agriculture laborers in Kenya. During the imperialism, the governing council passed laws to discourage growth of a rising black labor movement, and it passed a law against black growing coffee, responding to white growers' fear of competition and fear that black farmers would force up the price of black labor. And local environment was harmed by the colonization. One of the motivations of colonization is the extraction of resources from colonized countries. Colonialists searched for cheap raw material like wood and then caused the severe deforestation in local area. So the colonization by British in Kenya actually harmed the local environment. And for the Industrial Revolution, it brings Kenya a lot of new roads and railroads, and many automobiles and trucks were imported during that period. All of this helped develop the trade between Kenya and other countries. In this way, Kenya's economy is developed fast. But Industrial Revolution also contributed to global warming. The increasing vehicle and developing industry contribute air pollution to the environment, and more greenhouse gas were released to the atmosphere. All of those lead to increasing temperature after the Industrial Revolution. As for the deforestation and forest degradation, lower than 2% of forest cover country of the total land area in Kenya. During the 1904 to 1918, the government failed to evict the community from the forest. In 1972, the government succeeded in evicting the people, but within 6 months they were back in the forest. Most of these plantations found surrounding the local forest have been cleared to pave way for agriculture. And the reason the government wants to evict people out of the forest in Kenya is full of the resources and animals. For example, even though there are no endemic bird species in the forest, but it is said to represent the richest mountain birds in the Eastern Africa. When it comes to the burning of fossil fuels, Kenya's burning of fossil fuels has led to roadblocks in their economy as well as improvements. Things such as partnership benefit Kenya but increase air pollution. This led to significant increase in temperatures. Kenya is working on more efficient ways to benefit from upstream activities with less emissions. For now, the Kenyans increase the use of hydroelectric power. They have installed 1,600 megawatts of electricity, and there is a demand of 1,050 megawatts, growing at 8% a year. And the increase in solid fuel, liquid fuel, and gas fuel emission. Compared to other countries, it has oil production limited because of the Petroleum Act of 1984, and Kenya ranked 90th in total carbon dioxide emission from fossil fuels.
As a developing country, Kenya's dominant lifestyle is pretty similar to other developing countries, which are mostly occupied by farmers, tribes, and urbanized people. Talking about farmers, they produce small carbon footprint. Farmers earn very little income, and they were impacted because of the climate change that will affect their crops. Tribes also produce small amount of carbon footprint because they do not have incomes. All the daily uses are getting by trading. Even the urbanized people in Kenya are not affected a lot about the footprint. The average salary in Nairobi is about $1,450 per month. According to their salaries, Kenya has a low chance to negatively affect the footprint, and they are still trying to reduce it. And about the vulnerability of people, there are four main parts vulnerable people in Kenya that are women, poor, indigenous, and infants. The women in Kenya are particularly the ones that are vulnerable when it's come to the climate change. Since women have the role as a provider in Kenya, they are in charge of farming, and since farming has become more difficult due to the lack of rain and dry season, the women are working more and provide lives for families. During droughts, the women have to travel further, not only for water but food and wood for fire. Those long journeys puts those women at a risk for more violence. Those journeys also bring women into contact with more disease and illness, and if their leader of the household host is sick, it's hurt the entire family. For poor people, the poor are affected extremely by climate change. They have little to no backup when climate hurt them. Many of the poor are farmers, and with drought, they are having a hard time making money for crops they would normally trade with. They also heavily rely on fishing and natural resources, so if there is droughts, flash floods, and drought periods, it hurts them. For individuals of Kenya are located in the Mau forest and are known as the Ojiks. Since they live in the forest, they rely on all natural resources. So in Kenya, there has been an increase of deforestation, which forced them out of their homes. Relying on all natural resources, the droughts and the loss of trees that provide shelters, foods and woods for fire and any other things, they have less ways to survive. The last part is children and infants. They are firstly affected by the climate change when their mother have to make long trips just to try and find food and any necessary for survivals. Some children, especially daughters, have to make the long journey to retrieve wood, food, and water, which will increase again illness and disease which could be spread to the family. For trade-offs in Kenya, we provide some ideas which are using renewable energy, industrialization, reforestation, lifestyles, and reducing fossil fuels. Using renewable energy, it will reduce the use of fossil fuels and thus reduce the emission of greenhouse gases. For industrialization, it helps economy create more jobs. However, it speeds up the global warming and lose farmlands. And for reforestation, with planting new trees, it helps with storage for water during dry season, so it can be used for drinking and crops. It also natural resources that it provides will flourish, such as wood for fires, fruits, and honey that's used by indigenous people and other Kenyans. And more importantly, when you plant more trees, they will naturally release the carbon dioxide into the air. For livestock, it helps some people who do not have a job might get a job, and also use not properly used land in a correct way, which can increase the productivity. And besides those trade-offs, Kenya started to think about how to face the climate change in the future, and finally, Kenya decided to join into the UNFCCC to protect the world and itself.
This is Kenya's political platform. Kenya and the UNFCCC. Kenya signed on to the convention June 12, 1992, just a few days before the Rio Convention ended, and they entered the force November 28, 1994. Along with hosting the second Kyoto Protocol, they held the COP12 in Nairobi in November of 2006. Kenya, when joining the UNFCCC, adopted Agenda 21. Agenda provided potential practical solutions to environmental problems. Kenya has ratified most of the agreements, treaties, and protocols from the Rio Conference. Since joining the UNFCCC, they have been looking to improve and are improving environment and mineral resources, forestry, agriculture, and livestock. Kenya and the Kyoto Protocol. Became a party in 2006, held the second Kyoto Protocol conference, ninth country to accept Doha Amendment, formalizes commitments for the second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol, and one of 4 legal frameworks for carbon trading. Nairobi COP12 in Kenya. Debated reducing deforestation and accelerating technology transfers. U.S. and non-Annex 1 countries still oppose, so little progress for agreements after 2012 were made. Debate had little progress but focused on growing threats about climate change. Copenhagen COP15 in Kenya. Copenhagen tried to lead countries to use more renewable energy. Kenya has considered and followed the general idea of the UNFCCC, but not the accord that's suggested by Copenhagen. Denmark was an Annex 1 country, given some different suggestions that were weird for Kenya's planning. Therefore, Kenya decided to follow the general idea that given by the UNFCCC, but not given by Copenhagen on COP15. Cancun COP16 in Kenya. Upcoming cooperation between Denmark and Kenya. Danish Minister for Climate Change promised that Denmark will support Kenya's position during the talk and promised to help Kenya to work together in climate change issues. Helped and led a collaboration between France and Kenya to work on using clean energy. Kenya and France jointly propose to launch the Global Partnership of Clean Energy for All in Africa and the most climate vulnerable countries. Similar political viewpoint between Japan and Kenya. The second commitment under the Kyoto Protocol was not a priority. This similar political viewpoint brings an alliance between Japan and Kenya. Because regime is changed in Kenya, instead of considered as kingmakers, Kenya needs some kind of change. Political support is the first thing that they need. Lima COP20 in Kenya. Wants developing countries to take charge of increasing mitigation, ambition, and providing enhanced support for each other. Quick ratification of Doha Amendment. Green Climate Fund faster action for full capitalization. The Green Climate Fund will support developing countries to a low carbon climate resilient development pathway. Paris COP21 in Kenya. Paris COP21 was meant to help reduce global temperature by 2 degrees Celsius. Kenya is very dependent on natural resources, so they are ready for climate change to be slowed down. Kenya's national climate change response strategies. They have an adaptation plan for when all of this weather goes sour and they have to make up for it. Green technology plan, finance to make sure that the prices of everything stays at a reasonable wage, low carbon sector analysis, and a policy and regulatory framework. Next, we're going to cover the recommendations we have for our country.
Since COP Paris, we as Climate have come up with recommendations for Kenya to help with the global climate change and to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, but also help improve their country. Our first recommendation for Kenya is to slow down deforestation. Kenya was originally covered with 10% forest and has now dropped to 2%. And it is affecting their country because these trees in the forest are called water towers, and they collect rain during the rainy season, or the water during the rainy seasons, and slowly release it during the dry periods. And without having the trees to collect the water, you are ruining crops because they're not getting enough water during the dry periods, and they're actually absorbing too much sunlight and killing them too quickly. Our second recommendation for Kenya is to use renewable energy and to continue thriving using renewable energy. Kenya uses geothermal energy, which is using hot steam and water from inside the earth to power their country. Kenya recently just opened a new geothermal energy plant, which this one particular plant will provide 20% of the nation's total power capacity. With this plant being built and opened, now geothermal energy accounts for 51% of the nation's power. A second renewable energy that Kenya should consider using is wind energy. Because of where they are located, and right now due to the lack of trees, they have very good wind energy capacity. They are at the perfect wind speed between 8 and 14 miles per second, which wind energy requires it to be between 3 and 10, so they're at the perfect advantage for it. Our third recommendation is for Kenya to encourage and to use public transportation. First off, Kenya will need to develop public transportation, but once it's developed, it will help the country as a whole because you will have everyone traveling together and using one CO2 releaser versus many cars or whatever else they're using. And it will also help with producing income and money into the country so that they can use it to help continue to build more public transportation, to help with their green energy. With every recommendation, there are cost benefits to each. The first one was slowing down deforestation. Although it will help with climate change, it will first hurt Kenya's economy. It will hurt the economy because they use the trees to build weapons for trade, along with using empty land for farming area. Without the mass constant deforestation, they won't gain money as quickly. Although this takes away from the money in the economy, it will help the indigenous people take over their land again, and it will also help the dry season with the tree because they will be able to capture and store more water, in turn making more crops. Renewable energy will cost Kenya money at first to put in place the necessary resources to achieve using the energy, whether it be the geothermal energy to build more plants or whether it be to produce the wind turbines. Again, it will produce greenhouse gases at first because you have to use energy and metals and things to build the renewable energy sources, but once they are in place, they provide a clean and cheap, friendly way to provide energy. With the help from other countries, we can come up with equitable resolutions nationwide to help the planet, such as taxing wood and oil, to put into a fund to help developing countries put into place new green technologies. We can get these green technologies from developed countries, and they can help provide resources and information on how to develop them for developing countries. Although beautiful, you have heard all the ways Kenya needs help to improve their country to a higher standard based on their vulnerabilities and opportunities, how they need to improve their economy to help all lifestyles, but especially the vulnerable populations, how they have interacted with the UNFCCC in Kyoto to help climate change, and what we, Climate Think Kenya, can do to not only help them, but to help the environmental globally.